So we've covered the paths of travel and the stairs required for the property. So we've got some idea of those constraints. Now the next thing we'll have to be doing is, because we're putting in accommodation for a person with a disability, we need to consider disabled access. And it's not just disabled access around the building, but it's also provision of disabled access car parking, and there are requirements around that. There is the link here. So under our project 2, I dropped it. I think I dropped this one in last semester, and it gives a brief rundown of some of the aspects that you have to consider in regards to disabled access and disabled car parking. So I encourage you to work through here to get an idea of what aspects we'll be looking at. Things such as, also we've got accessible disabled car parking, accessible toilets, possibly not a major consideration for you in this project, and also because we've got the Revit models with that disabled bathroom in there that have all of the clearance areas around that. That's, by and large, that's the sort of thing you'll be adopting. Possibly you'll be making that bathroom larger and you'll be spacing some things out, but as long as they still have those circulation spaces around them, those circulation spaces attached to each element, you'll be fine with that. So there's not going to be a great deal that you need to work through with accessible toilets. But tactile ground surface indicators you want to be having a look at, and that'll come later, by the way. They're elements that can easily be added to something. So that's just about the little dots on the ground to say, okay, we're approaching a road, a car park, a ramp, or something like that, and other small features. So these are all things that can be built in at a later date and can primarily be covered by addition of notes on your drawings rather than any actual forethought and design. But the main thing when we're looking at car parking, it sets out our requirements there, or where our source documents are for all of that information. So we've got AS 2890.6 off-street parking for people with disabilities, and then the other important one is AS 1428.1 general requirements for access new building works. And then also AS 2890.6 requirements for accessible car parking spaces in Australia and New Zealand replaces the previous reference Appendix C 2890.1 1993. So there's been some updating of car parking requirements back in 2009. So what I like to do, so there we have some summaries, something that provides you with a bit of direction as to what things we need to be looking at. But as I always like to do, I like to go to the source documents for everything, get an idea about things. But yeah, as we as I've reiterated several times before, a lot of the Australian Standards, National Construction Code, it allows for that take your own path type approach. It allows for those varying different situations. Whereas a lot of your information sheets, all that information put out by either product suppliers, also the approach of that is to get you to either buy their product or go down a simplified path of this is the easy way to meet those compliance aspects. So this is our building here. Now this is another student's plan. There are so many different ways to go setting this out. By all means, don't let this, don't take this as an example of what you need to do. You have choice. You have choice of whether you take out that wall, that wall, that wall, or you can't take out. Actually, maybe you can do a little bit of work with that wall. You're not going to touch that wall.
It depends on whether you turn it into a fire escape or not.
Opening that wall, that's opening a can of worms. There's a bunch of ramifications for touching that. So look, I think probably because we have limited time, yes, it's one of those situations whereby you probably don't want to go delving into things too much and mucking around, disturbing the status quo too much. So, going to be dealing with one of these internal walls. One thing that came up in discussion just before the class was about this wall here. For the external students, I'll show you with the cursor there. The wall running along there, that is a load-bearing wall. That transfers load down onto these columns, which are down beneath. So you have to be aware of the location of those columns if you're going to be altering anything with that wall there. The reason we need to be aware of the location of those columns is because we're likely to have wall load, so roof loads landing on top of this wall at, well, I can't determine at what spacings, but probably we'll have point loads over each of these columns, but then some form of support at either 600 centres or 1200 centres over that wall. That's what we can assume, but we can't know for sure. If we are going to be messing with these walls, taking out these walls, that will require the installation of a fairly sizable lintel through there, probably a universal beam or so, to be able to transfer loads to where we've got columns. Beware that if you are going to be doing that sort of thing, that if you're messing around with that wall in this central apartment there, so we've got these two units here like that, then it's not only your if you're going to be messing around with the wall, say that you make this one and you're messing around with that wall, then you've got to transfer loads over to this column here. That's in another apartment there, and that means you're working with you're disturbing a second apartment. So beware of those things. It tends to be easier to not disturb that wall too much. Beyond that, with our car parking underneath, we have to enclose two sides of that, and it came up with the discussion earlier on. Okay, does it end up making it a Class 7 or a Class 10 building? Possibly, if we really want to answer that question, we can pour through that a little bit later today. Have a look in the NCC specifically at those definitions. But the intent of this project, as written for the subject, is that it makes that car parking area underneath a Class 10 structure. So we've got to include car parking, not only car parking for our various units, but we have to include some visitor car parking. And by the way, these plans shown here, these are only, well, from another student, these are only the preliminary plans. These are not the plans this is before the building designer consultation, by the way. So what you see here does not necessarily represent anything that is compliant or that does pass. So these are initial drawings that came through. So by all means, don't just go look at this and go, oh yeah, all right, let's just copy that and go down that without actually having any background of the understanding. Because if you do that, then you're going to run into some issues and not be able to work your way out of them. So it's about finding your own path. But I'm using these as an example so we can see some of that structure. So with our car parking, the other thing to be wary of is we've got those columns here. We've got our minimum size of the car parks and so on, and that's what we'll be looking at today. But we also have to work within an existing structure. Now, we've got to enclose several walls. got to enclose 2 walls. As Richard mentioned earlier, he's thought about enclosing all of the walls and having secure car parking underneath. Certainly, I'm fine with that, and that might be something that you can suggest to your client. Say, look, well, if we're enclosing these walls, how about we go the whole hole, make it all secure car parking, etc. Provide better service for not a great deal of financial input. So that might be something. What I will allow you to do is we've got that honeycomb structure at the front, which sort of gets in the way of car parking access, etc. I will allow you to remove or modify that honeycomb structure. So that is fine. So that way you can approach that car park from any which direction you wish. I think that's probably all the discussion we need to have in regards to that building. One other thing I'd like to bring up, it's just in regards to structure in general. So we have on that building this skillion roof. Now, if you look at that from the Revit model in its elevations, that is incredibly thin roof for spanning those distances, etc. Just assume that there are trusses, etc., that are able to achieve that, and we've got some sort of steel structure in there that's enabling that. I don't want you to dwell too much on the reality of that situation as going, well, we've got a roof spanning all this distance here. What is that? I can't read that distance. But yeah, something like 11 meters or so. Well, 7.6 meters spanning that with very little depth. Don't worry about those things too much. We have an existing structure and it's stood for years, but just remember that is a load bearing wall, and then we've got our load transfer support down the bottom through that front wall there as well through our columns here. So we can't really go messing with any of those columns. That's the main thing. So that document that relates to access for disabled refers to AS 1428.1. So that's general access requirements, and it also refers to AS 2890.6. 2890.6 is car parking for disabled. The next thing you're going to have to do for thinking about your car parking is look within the council's development plan. So we've got to determine what zone it is, then see, well, you're going to have to look at the heights and so on of your building as well, but also look at what requirements there are for disabled car parking, what requirements there are for visitor parking, how many we need to know, how many we need to have to supply as a bare minimum, and then also look at driveway widths, etc., and access to the property. Once you know all those things, you go, okay, we need X many car parks, etc., etc. X many need to be disabled, and so on. But as an absolute bare minimum, because we're supplying a disabled a unit for a disabled person, we have to supply at least one disabled car park as a bare minimum by the client's requirements. So we look at what the council requires, and then we both.
Wouldn't it be free because all 3 units are disabled?
No.
That would just be a general consideration, because if you've made all three building or all 3 apartments to be disabled compliant, and assume that maybe all 3 will be inhabited by someone in a wheelchair or someone disabled, you would need 3 as a base just for a client consideration.
So that's an excellent question. Yeah, what we first of all, what we need to do is we have to work out what are the bare minimum requirements. What does the law tell us we need to do? So what does the National Construction Code and Australian Standards tell us we need to do? What does the council tell us we need to do? We've got to start with, okay, working out what is the absolute bare minimum that we have to supply. And then, but I think it's really good to go that further step and think, okay, well that's the bare minimum we have to supply. How about we put in that extra little bit or that extra little bit of time in design or consideration to provide the service which is far greater without a great deal of input. I think that's...
Yeah, but there is quite a lot of margin. I think I have read somewhere it says 1 in 10 or 1 in 8. So with these 3 apartments, I mean, the ratio of how we'll actually come somewhere in the middle page to, maybe 2. Because as we discussed, it's 3 the civil
yes.
apartment, that's what we will consider.
Oh, right, okay. No, so what we're having to do with our apartment is we have to provide 1 apartment, and this sort of cuts towards something I was wanting to speak about a little bit later on, but we can bring that forward in the discussion here.
Because it has to be, I think, 1 disability parking for 10 or 8, or something like that.
Yes. So for any number, 10 or 8, or part thereof, because I'm pretty sure in the council's requirement, does it say part thereof? I'm fairly sure that it does or it will say part thereof, because that's a very typical inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So typically you've got your numbers, say 10 or 8, or part thereof. So let's say we've got 3, that means you have to produce 1. And then 1 up to 8, and if you're going beyond that 8, well then you have to do 2, etc., etc. But what our client wants us to do, or what the brief stipulates, is that you produce 1 apartment which is designed for disabled access. What the National Construction Code then ends up telling us is that if you have a building in which you have disabled access, and I'm not quoting the NCC, I'm just trying to summarise it, then you have to make all the other parts of that building to which that disabled person may reasonably be expected to enter, they have to be made disabled, compliant to disabled access as well. So if that's a stair foyer example, for example, then that has to be accessed. That has to have disabled access. If that is a non-compliant stair, that's not disabled compliant stair, then the disabled person doesn't have to gain access to that section there. If this is utility room or storage room or something like that, then the disabled person doesn't have to gain access to that, but they do have to gain access to the lift foyer, and also to this portion of the building if that's a disabled access compliant stairway, which, as we concluded last week, we'll have to have that for one of ours. But also the access doors for these apartments have to be disabled access compliant. So we're not necessarily required by a client brief to produce 3 apartments all for the housing of a disabled person, but in working through the requirements by the National Construction Code, they need to have access to these areas. But if you look here at our so that's just grabbing the standard bathroom with our clearance spaces and dropping it in. If our bathrooms are meeting those circulation spaces as required for disabled access, and we're ensuring that our front doors and the access around that apartment there meets disabled access requirements, well then essentially we're producing 3 disabled compliant apartments anyhow. Why not have a look at that early planning stage of saying, well, how about we make all of our car parking disabled compliant, because that's a very small step, if that's possible, to then provide a good outcome for the client, a great deal of value for the client. So that approach, all of what you, Richard, what you were wanting to discuss with that, yeah. So before we have a look at car parking only for disabled, we should also be having a look at car parking in general. So what we've got AS 2890.1. Now this is an important document both for this project and for Project 3, because Project 3, being an inner city office development, will have to consider car parking as well. So we've got first section of interest, section 1.4, classification of off-street car parking facilities. And then some preliminary design considerations, design of parking modules, design of circulation roadways and ramps. We've also got here design of domestic driveways. Does anybody know whether we'll be concerned with design of circulation roadways or design of domestic driveways for our building? Any idea?
The circulation roadways.
Yeah, because although this is a residential development, it's a residential development to be accessed by multiple unrelated parties. So we treat it as a public car parking. Access driveways, widths and locations. Gradients of access driveways. Does anybody know what the gradient of this property is currently? Has anybody had a look at that yet? I'll just cut to chase on that one. The land is really flat. So if you have a look at the topography on SM Map Viewer, it's flat as a tack. So there's no real issues there in terms of gradient of access. Possibly within the council requirements, there'll be some mention of bicycle parking. So you may want to have a look at those things if the council requirement takes you down that route. But we won't be going through that today. Additional requirements for car parking structures, headroom, etc., may be a consideration for us. But I imagine that's unlikely. So first of all, 1.4 on page 8. Well, that's our so under here we've got our user class, and that's going to be important later on for determining the size of our car parks. So user class 1 is for employee and commuter parking. User class 1A, residential, domestic and employee parking. 2, long-term city, town centre parking, sports facilities, entertainment centres, etc. 3, short-term city and town centre parking. 3A, short-term high turnover parking at shopping centres. And 4, parking for people with disabilities. So yes, we're going to be referring to AS 2890.6 for our car parking for people for disabilities. But as our general car parking area, if we're not going to go down that route and provide all disabled car parking, does anybody have an idea of which one would be? Have a suggestion? Which one would go with? Oh, sorry, everybody's coming forward because that's too small to read. My apologies. Okay, yeah.
Would it be 1A?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd go with 1A. Because it's definitely not going to be employee and commuter parking, any long-term city, short-term city, or high turnover parking. We will, however, for our next project, have to reconsider these. So we've got to be thinking, okay, is it short-term, high turnover parking, etc. So user class 1A, then what is that, page 2? Or I'll get the page of the index next time. It's on page 3, I think. Yeah. So preliminary design considerations, page 11, then design of parking modules 13, and then circulation of roadways and ramps 22. So we'll go to So the layout and design of an off-street car park should consider the entire facility, including parking modules, circulation, roadways, access driveways, and if necessary, frontage road access, and an integrated and coordinated design provision for traffic within a parking facility shall take into account the following: the need for traffic to move to and from the frontage road with a minimum disruption to through traffic and maximum pedestrian safety. So seeing that says what we have to do is we have to design the whole system, which is fine. We're given a fairly blank canvas. We've got a building, we've got columns, and that's our only constraint. Well, we have building columns, and then we also have a distance from the road. They're our only constraints. But apart from that, we have a very flat site, and then we've got some requirements for council about gardens and things like that. But we have a very blank canvas. But the other thing, well, I guess another constraint that we have, which is not on our property, but impacts on our property, is that the road, how we're accessing that. So when we're doing our initial investigation into the property, we're going to have to be looking at, okay, what sort of road is this sitting on? So if we were still up there on Shepherd's Hill Road, that would be a major consideration about how is traffic actually going to enter this site, because it's very busy. We've got divider strips on that road, etc., and you've got to think about how cars are going to be entering and exiting. With Kincaid Road, it's quite a bit quieter, but I encourage you to have a look at how Kincaid Road interacts with other roads, etc., where the majority of traffic, from what direction the majority of traffic is going to be coming, because that'll impact on how we enter and exit the site. We can go, okay, well, if they're coming from this way, they're going to come along this side of the road and turn in there. And we want that turn in to be happening here, and then exiting that direction. If they're coming from the other way, that may impact on how we set things out. Because what you're allowed to do a single access driveway with entry and exit either side, or you can do a double access driveway going in one way, coming out the other. So think about that. Have a look at Kincaid Road, see where the traffic's going to be coming in and out from, if there is a discernible, if there's one defined approach. Provision for adequate capacity in circulation roadways and parking aisles to handle peak period movements. That's going to be defined by your base. Your base standard for your driveway widths. Arrangement of internal roadways to avoid as far as possible conflicts between intersecting streams of circulation of traffic. That's like we discussed with Kincaid Road. And provision of minimum length travel paths between entry, exit points and parking spaces. That's going to be fairly straightforward in ours. In Project 3, that's something that's something you have to think about is, okay, where are we parking? How do we provide those minimum paths of travel? We don't want to be articulating things too much. With our parking spaces, we can either be parking cars on an angle, so angle parking, just like we've got out in the car park there, it's all on an angle, or we can do parallel parking. Parallel parking is where it's parallel to a road or a curbway or an access way, for example. So although we've got a building, we don't actually have a roadway there, but what we will be creating is a driveway of some sense. So there's still the possibility that our car parking comes under the classification of parallel parking. If we're doing angled parking, those parking angles have to be either 90 degrees, so at perpendicular to the roadway, or at 30, 45, or 60 degrees. So we're not allowed to just go, let's just put it at whatever sort of angle we wish. There are limitations there. So we've got our angle parking, parallel parking. So for our angle parking spaces, we've got actually, and also be aware of this for both the standard car parking and for disabled car parking. There are differences between Australia and New Zealand. Look for those differences where we're looking for Australia only. So, put simply, the minimum dimensions shall be as follows. In Australia, 2.3 metres wide by 5 metres long. But our user class will impact upon that. End overhang, where a vehicle may overhang the end of a space, e.g. at a curb, provided the first 600 millimetres immediately behind it is unobstructed, is not another car parking space, and is not required as a footway or for some similar purpose. Space length measured parallel to parking vehicle may be reduced to 600 millimetres. Ends of bays shall be provided with wheel stops if the requirements specified in 2.4.5.4 apply. That may be a consideration for you. When we're looking at our car parking spaces for that user class, it will say things like, we can have it this long if you have an overhang at this point in time, or at that particular point. So you may want to create some wheel stops at a certain location to have a section at the back there where we've got maybe some air conditioners, plumbing, all these sorts of things. That might be another approach that you want to adopt. So there we have our table setting out our minimum size requirements for our car parking, and also it sets out the aisle width as well. So unfortunately the external students can't see any drawing I'm doing on the board, but I think it helps to clarify exactly what these things are. I'll try to clarify as verbally as I can. But our aisle width, so we have, well, we just work through this table in reference to this document. So first of all, we've defined our user class. So user class, we've got 1 or 1A. So I suggest that's where we're at. Then our width of car parking, well, let's go with a 90 degrees. It's far easier to see. Our width, being B, is 2.4 metres for our 1A. And then C, our C, I have to refresh myself. Exactly, C1, C2, C3. So C1, where parking is to a wall or high curb, not allowing any overhang. So that's where we're going straight up to a wall. If we're doing our angled car parking directly straight up to that wall, our depth of car park has to be 5.4 metres. C2, where parking is to a low curb, which allows 600 millimetres overhang in accordance with 2.4. Then C2, we can reduce that to 4.8. So that 4.8, the difference between 4.8 and 5.4 is 600 millimetres. So basically it's exactly the same. It's just about going, okay, well, we'll stop your wheels here at this point. And then for C3, where parking is controlled by wheel stops installed at right angles to the direction of parking, or where the ends of parking spaces from a sawtooth pattern, etc., 5.4. So we can think about our layout where we want to have wheels, whether or not we want to have wheel stops bringing cars away from that end wall or not. Then, so we've got our minimum length, our minimum width, but also remember these are minimums. So it's like, okay, that's the bare minimum we have to work with. And then for our 1A, we've got an aisle width, and the aisle width is that area behind the car park. So that aisle, that can be shared by other car parks on the other side as well. So our minimum aisle width is 5.8 metres to enable people to reverse out of there and drive out. So those are going to be the important constraints for working out the size of your car parks under that building. And that's, actually we've got access roadway widths as well. So, well, that covers our angle parking. We also have requirements for parallel parking. Might get through to that in a bit. Yeah, but we've got, yeah, we're class 1A aisles. So minimum aisle widths are shown in figure 2.2. Note these may be of lesser width than those for class 1A aisles and may not allow access into parking spaces in a single manoeuvre by some vehicles. See Appendix B. But we're given our minimums there, so we'll move through that. However, also if we have a blind aisle, so a blind aisle is something that doesn't enable that the passage through. At blind aisles, the aisle shall be extended a minimum of 1 metre beyond the last parking space, as shown in figure 2.3, and the last parking space widened by at least 300 millimetres if it is bounded by a wall or a fence. So if our aisle is then terminating at a wall, butting up against the wall, then we have to allow that additional 300 millimetres. Then parallel parking requirements. So what's our angle parking module layout? So if we're going to include any parallel parking, we've got a minimum aisle width of only 3 metres, but our length of space has to be 6.3. And I'm just by L. Yeah. So it depends on whether you've got several parks in a row or not, as to which length of space you need. But that's, yeah, I consider that parallel parking is going to be an unlikely event under our building. So then go back up to, actually no, I think it was on page 22 anyhow, wasn't it? Our access driveways. So layout and design of circulation roadways and ramps. So we're going to have a circulation roadway, we're not going to have a circulation ramp in this situation. So straight roadways and ramps as follows. A one-way roadway or ramp has to be minimum 3 metres wide between the curves or between the sides of that roadway, and 2 roadways or ramps minimum 5.5 metres. So if we're doing a dual access way, we need to be minimum 5.5. If we're doing a single access way, going in parking and a single access exit way, then we have to be 3 meters wide. Where there is a curb or barrier higher than 150 millimeters and closer than 300 millimeters from one edge of the roadway or ramp, the roadway or ramp should be widened to provide a minimum of 300 millimeters clearance to the obstruction. I don't see why we're going to be specifying any higher ramps, curbs and so on in this situation, but that may be a consideration. So we've got those minimum requirements for our general car parking. But as suggested earlier, which I think is a fantastic suggestion, is can we just make them all disabled car parks? This may also well be the approach. I'll make this one larger as well so we can see through that. So first up in AS 2890.6, we're given the dimension of our disabled car park. So that width, so that's that very familiar width. That's from our other 2890.1. But as I mentioned before, we've got distinction between Australia and New Zealand. So in Australia, that dedicated parking space has to be 5.4 meters long, which is also a very familiar dimension. However, then it also requires either a shared area at the end of 2.4 meters or a shared area to the side. In Australia, that shared area has to be 2.4 meters wide, and that shared area, that can't be location for air conditioning, location for motorbikes, location for storage or anything else. It is an area that can be shared with another car park, but it has to have a bollard here to stop any other car parking in use of that space.
So if you have two disabled car parks next to each other, they can just share that same space in between them. They don't need like their own individual space on either side.
No. So they can have that. What you could do essentially, and I apologise to the external students, is we could do disabled, shared, disabled, shared, and disabled. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4 car parks happening there with only 2 shared areas. That's if that sort of fits within our space constraints of our building. So if we're going right up against the wall there, well then, okay, obviously that shared area can only be used by that space, and we have to have that bollard in place. Or as shown there, we've got disabled, shared area, and disabled. And this could be a parking aisle or roadway. So that pretty much provides you with all the information you require in terms of space, but then it's also set out in a written fashion beneath that. Also diagrammatically shown parallel parking spaces. So you can have a dedicated parking space, has to be minimum of 7.8 meters long, and then have a shared area for in Australia of 1600 on the side of that. So just as it's set out here. So we're 7.8 meters long in our parking space, and then that 1600 millimeters here for our shed area. But our access way can be adjacent that side. Oh, that's right. There's also the head heights of 2.5 meters minimum, but that's probably not going to be a consideration for us in this development for this building. Also, what is also required is that you have them shown as disabled parks. So they have so you've probably got a Revit family in that. No, there's not one for disabled.
No, you just put in a boller. You just put in. I'm not sure if there is one.
There is about there is.
Yeah.
But then you just do hatching.
Oh yeah, for the shared area. So hatching for the shared area, but you also have to show that wheelchair symbol. That one's there as well. Yeah. So that will be drawn complying. So we don't need to pour through. Okay, the size and shape of that. So yeah. So you have to put in those indicators and the bollard to restrict movement as well. So drop in the bollard, drop in the hatching and the wheelchair symbol to define that as disabled car parking. The other thing that you have to consider with disabled car parking is that the disabled car park has to be the car park which is closest to the entry and exit to that building. Of course, if it's all disabled car parking, well, that simplifies that situation as well. So I'll quickly, if you don't mind, I'll quickly stop it at that.